Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is here, and fans everywhere are desperate to know what has changed in this new game. After Final Fantasy VII Remake introduced a series of shocking changes to the original Final Fantasy VII adventure, franchise fans everywhere are worried, and in many cases eager and worried about how different this new game really is compared to its predecessors. While we're going to talk about some of the biggest differences you'll find in Rebirth, here are a few things to keep in mind about this breakdown, since everything we discuss could be considered a spoiler. However, I'm refraining from sharing the specifics of the biggest story spoilers in the game, especially if they change the base Final Fantasy VII experience in some way. We'll dive into those specific spoilers in separate pieces in the near future. Finally, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a massive game. We'll be covering some of the biggest overall changes it introduces, but there are countless little things that even longtime fans will be surprised by in this adventure. Let's dive in. For the most part, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is an open-world game. The game features an absolutely massive explorable world that is brimming with things to do, places to see, and people to meet. It could easily take you 100 hours to do everything the game has to offer, and most will never come close to achieving that goal. That emphasis on the game's open world is a pretty big change from the original Final Fantasy VII and even Final Fantasy VII Remake. While the original Final Fantasy VII allowed for exploration once you unlock the world map, it was a style of exploration limited by the franchise's standards and the technology of the time. Final Fantasy VII Remake afforded you often surprising degrees of freedom to pursue various side activities, but it was largely limited to the Midgar area, which ultimately also limited your exploration options. Rebirth splits the difference between some of those concepts. Unlike titles like Skyrim that let you go anywhere you want right away, you will not be able to explore all or even most of Rebirth's map from the start of the game. You will instead unlock new areas to explore as you progress. However, you will eventually be able to traverse the available map as you see fit, and even fast travel between key areas. So, it's not quite as open of a world as we saw in Final Fantasy XV, but it's much more open than the sectionalized world of Final Fantasy XVI. While the original Final Fantasy VII allowed you to ride chocobos, Rebirth expands upon that game's relatively simple version of that mechanic with a surprisingly dynamic modern mount system. In short, one of the best ways to navigate Rebirth's larger areas is to ride a chocobo, and those chocobos can be summoned at any time once they have been caught. It's that catching and taming process that makes things so interesting this time around. Not only do you have to catch a chocobo in each region before you can ride it, but there are unique chocobos to catch in each region that have powerful special abilities. Furthermore, the process of tracking chocobos is closely tied to the game's aforementioned fast travel system. While Final Fantasy VII Rebirth offers a massive world to explore, some of the areas that were technically explorable in this part of the game in the original Final Fantasy VII are not available in Rebirth. Most notably, the Wutai Village region is nowhere to be found in Rebirth, but that's only because it's being saved for the next chapter of this series. There are a few places from the original Final Fantasy VII you won't find in Rebirth. There are a couple of entirely new areas in Rebirth that help fill out the game's massive map. The most notable of those new areas is Crow's Nest, a kind of anti-Shinra encampment that not only expands upon a world-building element previously emphasized in the Midgar section, but offers quite a few new side activities. These new areas are certainly not as large as many of the returning regions and cities. They generally offer more collectibles, more activities, or otherwise expand upon some element of the world building in ways that the original game did not. Generally speaking, Rebirth's combat is fairly similar to the combat seen in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Refinements have been made here and there, but the broad strokes are largely the same. However, Rebirth does expand upon one of the biggest new combat features previously seen in Remake's Intermission DLC, synergy attacks. As the name suggests, synergy attacks allow party members to combine skills and effectively create new abilities in the process. Given the number of possible party combinations in this game and the various synergy attacks those combinations enable, this feature certainly adds a welcome amount of variety to the overall combat experience. Original Final Fantasy VII featured a pretty simple relationship system that largely determined who Cloud went on a date with during a specific portion of the game, but also had a minor impact on some smaller sequences. Final Fantasy VII Remake featured a slightly expanded version of that same basic system. True to most other aspects of the game, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth expands upon that mechanic in some significant ways. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Cloud's relationships were largely determined by a mostly invisible point system that you contributed to based on various decisions made throughout the game. In Rebirth, you have much more direct control over who you decide to have a relationship with. Each character that can be dated in the game has an individual relationship meter that you can contribute to by completing character side quests, interacting with them regularly, and generally performing actions that will please them. By the time you reach a certain point in the game, the character you have the highest relationship rating with will be your date for certain special events. At the start of the game, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth offers easy, normal, and dynamic difficulty options. You can also unlock a hard mode by completing the game. Easy, normal, and hard are fairly easy to understand from the outset. Dynamic is a new concept for Final Fantasy VII that changes the experience in notable ways. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's dynamic difficulty mode essentially scales the difficulty to match your character's current power level. It's not advanced enough to alter the overall experience to match your specific skills and personal capabilities, but it does ensure that even formerly lower-level enemies will receive a buff to match your basic current power level. This is a scaling feature we see in more and more modern games, and it's interesting to see the Rebirth team take a crack at their version of that experience. Is it worth it? I will say that anyone who enjoys Rebirth's combat but gets bored by all but the most level-appropriate battles may get a kick out of those extra challenges. Those who would rather occasionally tear through a lesser foe or just not have to worry about every fight being a tougher fight will likely be better off going with another option. Rebirth features a surprising collection of character-specific sections that see you directly control a party member other than Cloud for a brief period of time. Sometimes, though not always, these sections alter the core gameplay in pretty surprising ways. Ultimately, one of the ways that Rebirth regularly tries to mix things up. However, I think the reactions to some of these specific sections will vary wildly. In my experience, some feel significantly more enjoyable and fulfilling than others. Interestingly, you no longer have as much freedom to acquire new weapons in Rebirth as you did in Remake and the original Final Fantasy VII game. Instead, most weapons are acquired by opening special chests found at pivotal points in the game. Even if you miss those chests, you have the ability to purchase those weapons later from various vendors. This system certainly expedites the equipment upgrading process, though it will likely prove to be divisive among fans who see that process as more of an adventure than a burdensome necessity. What are your thoughts and what you think about this upcoming game? Share your opinions in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more gaming updates. Until next time, happy gaming!